What if the woman behind the biggest royal scandal in British history was also under investigation by two of the world's most feared intelligence agencies for sending secrets straight to Adolf Hitler? What if the woman a king sacrificed everything for, his crown, his empire, his bloodline, was quietly handing classified British intelligence to the Nazi foreign minister she was sleeping with? And what if that same woman spent her last years paralyzed, voiceless, locked inside a Paris bedroom while the world she once dominated moved on without her? Her own name never once spoken at her own funeral. This is not a rumor. This is documented history. This is not fiction. This is not conspiracy theory. This is documented history pulled from FBI surveillance files, MI5 intelligence reports, wanted captured Nazi wartime documents known as the Marburg files. Her name is Wallis Simpson, wife who slept with Nazis. Welcome to Nazi History, the channel that goes where mainstream history refuses to go.
If you're new here, subscribe right now. Hit the bell because every single week we pull stories like this one out of the classified archives and put them in front of you. Now let's go back to the beginning. Pennsylvania, June 19th, 1896. A girl is born into the kind of poverty that sits right next to wealth, close enough to see it, far enough that it burns. Her name is Bessie Wallace Warfield, and before she is old enough to form a memory, her father is dead. Teacle Wallace Warfield, a Baltimore merchant, dies young, leaving her mother, Alice Montague, to raise their daughter on the generosity of relatives. As Wallace grows up watching other people's money, she watches the way wealthy women dress, how they carry themselves, how they command a room simply by walking into it, and she files every single observation away, like intelligence to be used later. By 1912, her uncle arranges for her to attend Oldfield School, the most expensive girls' school in the entire state of Maryland. She doesn't belong there by birthright. She earns her place there by sheer force of personality. Teachers describe her as relentlessly ambitious.
Fellow students remember how she dressed with absolute precision, never appeared untidy, and worked constantly to distinguish herself from every other girl in the room. She wasn't the richest girl at Oldfields, but she performed wealth better than the girls who were born into it. And here is the first thing you need to understand about Wallis Simpson. She was never just a woman in love. She was a woman with a plan, and she executed it with terrifying discipline for the rest of her life. In 1916, at 20 years old, Wallis married her first husband, Earl Winfield Spencer Jr., a U.S. Navy aviator who looked like the answer to every prayer she had ever said. He was dashing, confident, and magnetic in his uniform. Behind closed doors, he was a violent alcoholic who disappeared for months on long overseas postings and left her completely alone. Wallis used that time strategically. She began a romantic affair with Argentine diplomat Felipe de Espiel, a sophisticated, well-connected man who introduced her to a world of European-style diplomacy and political maneuvering she had never experienced before. She traveled to China, living in Beijing, where gossip later placed her in an intimate relationship with Count Galeazzo Ciano, an Italian diplomat who would go on to marry Benito Mussolini's daughter and become fascist Italy's foreign minister. The rumors from China were the most explosive of all. Intelligence circles whispered that Wallis had become pregnant by Ciano and suffered a botched abortion that left her permanently unable to conceive children. No hard evidence was ever produced, but in the intelligence world, a rumor with that kind of specificity doesn't simply evaporate. It follows. Her marriage to Spencer collapsed under the weight of his alcoholism and her serial infidelities. They divorced in December 1927. Within a year, she had found her next move, Ernest Aldrich Simpson, an Anglo-American shipping executive. A quietly wealthy, steady, and kind, divorced his first wife to be with Wallis. They married in July 1928 and relocated to London. It was the smartest geographical decision Wallis ever made. London's elite social circuit was everything Baltimore had not been. Wallis was sharp, wickedly funny, and dressed better than almost anyone in the room. She cultivated connections with surgical precision. And then, through those very connections, she was introduced to a man who would alter the course of British history. Edward, the Prince of Wales, the most eligible bachelor on the planet, the man who would one day rule an empire spanning a quarter of the globe. He was handsome in that exhausted, aristocratic way, a man performing a role he had never auditioned for and never wanted. His charm was genuine, his warmth undeniable,
But the crushing machinery of royal duty pressed down on him constantly, and he had never found anyone who made him feel free from it. Until Wallis. She didn't bow to him. She didn't soften her opinions for him. She challenged him, teased him, argued with him over dinner tables while other guests sat in stunned silence. Edward was completely undone by her. By January 1934, according to multiple intelligence sources and royal household staff, Wallis had become his mistress. Edward denied this furiously to his father, King George V, even as palace staff reportedly witnessed the two of them together in circumstances that required no further explanation. Here is where the romance becomes something far more dangerous than love. When King George V died in January 1936, Wally Edward ascended the throne as King Edward VIII and almost immediately declared that he intended to marry Wallis Simpson, a twice-divorced American woman with a complicated intelligence file. In a country where the king was the supreme governor of a church that absolutely forbade the remarriage of divorced persons, Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin delivered the verdict plainly. Parliament would not accept it. The dominions of the British Empire would not accept it. The royal family would not accept it. Walk away from this woman or face the destruction of your government and your crown. In December 1936, after the shortest reign of any British monarch in the modern era, less than 12 months, Edward abdicated. His farewell broadcast reached an estimated 100 million listeners worldwide. He spoke quietly about carrying the burden of kingship and said, with devastating simplicity, that he could not do it without the woman he loved beside him. Across Britain, women wept. Across the empire, governments panicked. To millions of people, it was the greatest love story of the 20th century. To the intelligence services of Britain and America, it was a catastrophe. Edward and Wallis married in France on June 3, 1937. She became the Duchess of Windsor. She was deliberately, formally denied the title of Royal Highness, a calculated humiliation engineered at the highest levels of the British royal family to mark her permanently as an outsider. 4 months later, in October 1937, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor traveled to Nazi Germany at the personal invitation of the Nazi government. They toured factories. They admired the new Autobahn highways. They were photographed laughing alongside Joseph Goebbels and Hermann Göring. And at Berchtesgaden, they sat face to face with Adolf Hitler. The photographs from that meeting traveled around the entire world. Two people.
But it was one specific relationship that alarmed British intelligence far beyond a photograph. Joachim von Ribbentrop, Hitler's foreign minister, formerly Germany's ambassador to London, had known Wallis Simpson personally during his London posting. The story that circulated in intelligence circles was precise and devastating. Ribbentrop had sent Wallis 17 carnations, one for each time they had slept together. Some accounts claimed she kept a personally signed photograph of Ribbentrop displayed on her bedside table. MI5 placed Wallis under active surveillance. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover compiled a personal file on her. Duke Karl Alexander of Württemberg told FBI investigators directly that Wallis and Ribbentrop had been lovers. The FBI file noted she was in constant, ongoing contact with him. More alarming still were the espionage allegations. Senior Foreign Office official Robert Van Sittart received intelligence suggesting that Wallis was actively extracting classified British government information from conversations with Edward and passing it to Nazi Germany. The accusation was serious enough that Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden quietly ordered restrictions on the volume of sensitive material shown to the king himself, the first time in modern history that a reigning British monarch had been denied access to his own government's intelligence. Wallis denied everything. She maintained that denial for the rest of her life. But in 1940, Nazi Germany's own files would reveal exactly how valuable the Windsors had become to Hitler's war machine. June 1940. France collapses in 6 weeks as German forces sweep across the continent. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor flee south with hundreds of thousands of refugees, first to Franco Spain, then to neutral Portugal. And it is here, in Lisbon, that Hitler makes his most brazen move of the entire war, Operation Willy. The plan was this: use a combination of flattery, financial inducements, and, if necessary, physical abduction to seize the Duke of Windsor and hold him until Germany completed its conquest of Britain. Once Britain fell, Edward would be installed on the British throne as a Nazi-controlled puppet king, armed with Wallis at his side. Germany would control Britain from within, from the inside. Hitler personally dispatched one of his senior intelligence operatives to Lisbon to coordinate the operation. German agents surrounded the couple's movements. Coded messages flew between Lisbon and Berlin. Whether Edward actively encouraged the scheme remains one of the most debated questions in modern historical scholarship. What is not debated, because it is written in the captured Nazi documents themselves, is that Hitler's government considered the Duke of Windsor a potentially willing collaborator, and that Wallis's existing connections to Ribbentrop and senior Nazi officials made her central to that calculation. Winston Churchill moved with rare urgency. He sent Edward direct personal warnings. What he then engineered was the one solution that would simultaneously neutralize the threat and avoid the catastrophic public scandal of arresting a former British king. Edward was appointed governor of the Bahamas and dispatched across the Atlantic, as far from Nazi Europe as a British posting could reach. Nassau was safe. It was also a slow suffocation. The colony was small, the heat relentless, and the social world a pale ghost of everything they had known.
Wallis threw herself into charity work, visiting hospitals, organizing school fundraisers, appearing in public with the practiced grace of someone who had been performing composure her entire life. Internally, both she and Edward seethed. They felt condemned, punished, erased. Now, Edward made remarks during this period that echoed Nazi talking points about Jewish people and praised German social organization, remarks that confirmed the worst suspicions of London and Washington about where his real sympathies lay. Wallis, meanwhile, made openly racist comments about the local Bohemian population that were documented by multiple witnesses. Neither of them appeared to grasp or care how history was already writing its verdict on them. When the war ended, the couple returned to France. Their Paris home became a glamorous salon for the fashionable and famous. Magazine covers, sparkling jewels, legendary dinner parties. On the surface, magnificent. Underneath, the shadow of the 1930s never fully lifted. Then the Marburg files were published. The captured Nazi documents confirmed in cold documentary language what intelligence agencies had suspected for years. Hitler's government had viewed the Windsors as useful political assets. Operation Willy was real. The couple's connections to the Nazi regime were real. The debates about whether they were sympathizers or simply naive pawns have never been fully resolved, and likely never will be. Edward's health declined through the late 1960s. In May 1972, he died of throat cancer in Paris. Their marriage had been childless, and now Wallis was, for the first time in her life, genuinely alone. The woman who had manipulated kings and frightened intelligence agencies began to vanish. A series of strokes, severe arthritis that deformed her fingers so badly that her wedding ring, the symbol of the love that had ended a monarchy, could no longer fit on her hand. 2 broken hips, her mind dissolving piece.
On April 24th, 1986, Wallis Simpson died of bronchial pneumonia. She was 89 years old. Her funeral was held at St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle. The Queen attended, the Queen Mother attended. A Princess Diana attended, and reportedly said it was the only time she ever witnessed her mother-in-law weep. At the service, by multiple accounts, Wallis Simpson's name was not spoken aloud once. She was buried beside Edward at the Royal Burial Ground at Frogmore House. The woman history blamed for destroying the monarchy, suspected of spying for Hitler, and denied the dignity of her own name at her own funeral. History did not forgive Wallis Simpson, but it never stopped talking about her either. That was the complete documented story of Wallis Simpson, the American woman who brought the British throne to its knees, walked through the highest levels of Nazi Germany, and died alone, without a voice, in a Paris bedroom. If this story hit you the way it hit me when I first pulled it from the archives, smash that like button right now. It costs you nothing, and it helps Nazi history reach people who are hungry for real, unfiltered history. Subscribe if you haven't already, and drop your verdict in the comments. Was Wallis Simpson a Nazi spy, or was she simply the most dangerous woman the British royal family ever underestimated? We'll see you in the next one.